All right, so MUN research. This is something you should do after you learned Clash Information Action, which luckily we just did, specifically Clash. The goal of research is to come up with a clash. Clash is what you want to do about the issue you are discussing. One line of policy. This is what we're researching for, and this is why, before we go into research, there's one thing which is the purpose of research and the purpose of what I'm going to be talking about now, which is to know when to stop. Okay, this is the number one rule. You can go down the internet search rabbit hole for a very long time, and I have seen so many times where new delegates go, well, I actually never knew about, nuclear treaties and that countries can, give each other votes depending on topic. So let's say right now one country votes for me about nuclear proliferation, and I help with them in the environment. And I then started reading about which countries trade votes with each other and spend 5 hours. And the topic has nothing to do with any of that. So be careful. You'll learn many interesting things along the way. It is a rabbit hole, which can be a bizarre environment and hard to pull yourself out of. Okay, so for Belgium ocean pollution, there's almost 15 million results. A lot of interesting information. Don't do it. Know when to stop. That's my 2 cents on research. The goal is to know enough to come up with a policy. The way that I recommend doing research is three parts: committee, country, topic, and to do it in that order, and to do it where you have just enough to move on to the next thing. Okay, so for committee, the minimum that you want, and by the way, this is again, I would say for all of these, for committee, you should spend probably up to 20 minutes, and that's only because it's hard to find concrete information on some of the committees. For your country, you should probably try to also spend maybe 20 minutes, half hour, and then with the topic, probably the same. And once you've done all three, then you try to come up with a clash. Okay, so probably second. It's actually a good. So I'd probably say 20 minutes for each. Try to get done in an hour, and you'll by then you'll know much better. And I would go further and say that they say if you want to try anything in the world, do it for 20 minutes. You'll already know much more. So same thing here. For committee, what you want to do to know is basically mandate, power, and responsibility, or mandate what they're doing today and their precedents. Precedent are big things that they've done. So mandate is what your committee says they do. This you should be able to find very quickly, within like a minute or two, on the committee website or Wikipedia. Wikipedia is very well referenced and has many editors and is usually the most up to date. Many UN committees won't always specify what they do, especially not on their website. You may have to dig to find the report to actually talk about it. And it's challenging because for those who are using, AI search, they also don't find better things. Usually they're going to get something even more vague than the website. So really it's worth learning to do the research on your own. So when your committee says they do, ChatGPT probably could find this one pretty easily. What they're doing now, this can be in the news or Wikipedia, and the precedents of what your committee has done in the past, the biggest things it's done, because that's what they can do. The reason you should take 20 minutes to learn about your committee before you start is because if you don't know what you can do, you will be making things up for the rest of this process. And that's something that you want to avoid very much. If you right now, and I can say the best example is beginner human rights councils, where, they usually want to invade a country. And if they are experienced, not experienced, but they come from like knowing that the Human Rights Council can't invade a country, their resolution will recommend the Security Council invade a country. Like that's, and I've seen that happen a bunch of times because we don't know what our committees can do. Now, the Human Rights Council is a little more complicated because they basically declare if things are human rights violations or not and don't actually do anything. And by the way, there are some committees that give recommendations and don't do. So for this reason, know what your committee does, because your clash needs to fit within those parameters. Okay, that's number one. So that next we move on to country. Now for country again, there can be an endless amount of data. And this is why we need to turn it into human information that we can use. For country, I would say there are five things you want to research, which are basic, and it's your country size, population, neighbors, wealth, and politics. And then two committee specific ones, which are things getting better or are things getting worse? And I'm going to get there in a minute. So first of all, for these things, how do we turn this information that we can use to understand where we stand compared to the rest of the world? So these are the answers to these questions. And when I sit with student groups, I always have them break it down like this. Just answer me about your country. Is it very big? Is it very small? How do you find that? You look at a map and you look who is big and who is small. India is big. Greece is small. Okay? Turkey is big. Russia is very big. That's it. And you can look around and we see, so it's pretty easy. You don't need to Google what is the country size. We don't know what 150,000 square kilometer is, but we know big and small. Population, just the number of people. We know how many people our country has. We know how many people there are in China. Just helps us understand in relation how many people there are. We can usually multiply the issues in a country by the amount of people when we mix it with wealth. All right, next, war, not war, with your neighbors. That is it. You don't need to do anything beyond that. With war, I'd say usually worth looking in the news. If the news talks about war, then war is happening. And the reason it's important is if you're at war, all of your decisions go towards war. Even if it's like an environmental committee, you're saying we don't have the resources right now to build, clean energy resources or wind turbines because we're too busy trying to build, drones and tanks and keep our people from dying. Most countries are not at war. A few of them are. You would know. If you're not at war, business as usual. If you are at war and you're a diplomat of your country, you want to try to get the resolution to help with your war effort or not make things worse. Next is wealth. So I'm saying for war, you simply need to internet search the news. Are you at war? War with yourself, by the way, can also be a war. And if it's not war, cold peace, by the way, doesn't mean war. Like you can have a country that you're not at peace with, but that doesn't mean that you're actively at war. It just means that you guys aren't at peace. But if you're not shooting at each other every day or firing rockets or RPGs or missiles, then you're not. Next, wealth. Same thing. Very rich to very poor. Where does your country stand? The way to mix this is with GDP. GDP is gross domestic product, how much a country produces. It doesn't measure all wealth like online sales, but it's a pretty good indicator. And then there's GDP per capita, which is how wealthy the individuals are. So just take a quick glance at both and it'll help you see where you stand. For example, GDP nominal, which is the wealth of a country, US, China, Japan, Germany, India. So based on this, these should be the richest countries in the world. But if you look at GDP per capita, by the way, you look here for who is above and who is below. Like, let's say I'm Germany, I'm poorer than Japan, I'm richer than India, something like that. Next, you have GDP per capita, which is how rich people are. And we see here that all of a sudden, Monaco, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and Bermuda are the richest countries in the world. What's going on? They're not even on the other list. So that's when, if you look down, the United States is seventh after Singapore, after Qatar. So looking at the two of these, you can see that if you're high up on one list but low on the other, your people are poor, but your government usually has a lot of money because there are a lot of people. So just glance at both of these and averaging out the two. Usually you can see how wealthy and clout, usually per capita shows how rich your people are. But if you're a tiny country of less than 500,000, that your people are rich doesn't really help on the global stage. So if you're high on both, you're very rich. If you are high on one but not the other, then that works differently. And we have Roy Nachlieli here. What an honor. Welcome. All right. Finally, politics. Politics is who is running your country. This can be, I divide into three categories. There's a not democracy, a democracy, and then a democracy. Not democracy, you do whatever the leader says. A democracy, with quotations, do whatever the leader says. If it's an actual democracy, and that means they have elections and a transfer of power, you need to research the ruling party to see what their policies are and how do you find out? And it's tricky because many countries will use words like, liberal, for example. But just because the party is the liberal party doesn't mean that it is, necessarily on the left. There are many examples, like the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is North Korea, is not a particularly People's Republic. So don't just trust the names. Recommend that you find the head of state of the country. Let's say we're going for the Prime Minister of Canada. We find that it's Mark Carney of the Liberal Party, but we don't know that that is, the Liberal Party. By the way, even sometimes the conservative parties are not always the most to the right party that there are. And here we see that the Liberal Party is the center left. Okay, so Mark Carney of Canada, the Prime Minister of the Liberal Party, which is indeed a center left party. And once you know who's in charge, you then know how the policies are, and we can definitely imagine how policies are different between, let's say, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So keep that in mind. Reviewing country size, population, neighbors, wealth, politics. You go through this, you'll have a pretty quick idea of what lenses you want to look at the topic, which is then the issue of the day. Now, you want to find your country's connection to the topic. And if you don't have a connection, try to find an ally who has a connection, make up a connection, because every one of you want to present like you are the most important delegate in the room. And unless you are the delegate who's the main one on the topic, by the way, you can even say that you are more important than the delegate the topic is talking about. You can say, what happened to them is already happening. We're next, or we're impacted in some larger way. So you want to definitely represent that, whoever you are. Vanuatu, Tuvalu, I don't know. So you need to show if there's a positive or a negative relationship between the topic. This is where when you research the topic, it's not just reading for reading's sake. You want to identify trends and see if things are getting better or see if things are getting worse. Okay? So when you research about yourself and your country, you want to look at the topic and see if things are getting better or worse. The prep for research is also reading the study guide. That's the one thing that everyone in your committee will have in common, except people who didn't read it at all. This is your joint uh, place of reference, and it's something which you should assume that everybody read, or they're going to be catching up. And that means even if the guide's not great, and hopefully all the guides for this conference will be great because Secretariat are excellent and doing their due diligence, it's still what some people will be using if they're not researching any further. Additional specific data at this point, by the way, if you identify your trends, you'll know what to dig deeper on, to find your country's trends, to understand the different interests that you have. If you're a wealthy country, if you aren't, if the country being discussed is an ally of yours or they are not. Okay, so for this, and this is basically a very important place to avoid rabbit holes. Focus on the issue your country is talking about, not all the other offshoots, not other things that just seem really cool now that we've looked at this for the first time. And for our first few million conferences, this is what we're doing. We're learning about things in the world that we have never heard of before, that we have never paid attention to before. And I want to finish the research section with one final point, which is that when you do look at the history of the topic outside of the study guide, because study guide is going to give you some kind of history of the topic, what you want to keep in mind is that it's the what, where, when, how, and who, and something the study guide should write but doesn't always, which is what's going to happen if no one intervenes? What's the terrible thing that's going to happen if we don't prevent this virus? If we don't help these cities from keep them from sinking? The damage of no intervention is the reason that we are here discussing the issue, and that should be the motivation behind the research and what you're doing. And when you're learning history, which should also be recent history, and you want to keep things up to date, remember that in your research, we're learning about the world to know what worse things can possibly happen. And we want to prevent that with our clash, with our policy. Our speech is here to save the world, help our friend. Even things that seem very local can have an impact. And even if we make a 2% difference, if millions of people are being impacted, that's tens of thousands. That could be hundreds of thousands being saved by our one little different action. Okay, so that's pretty much it for research in a short amount of time. I put the article in the chat, which does this more in depth. Are there any questions that anybody has on research? If you do, I'll invite Veer to chair this Q&A section. There's also going to be our last bit of questions for today. Veer, you're able to choose questions?
Just a sec. There was the question about UN Security Council. Okay, double delegation. Rui Nakhlili is here, so like pretty soon in a few minutes. Not now, even not now. You will go to the breakout rooms, and Rui Nakhlili, the chair of the Security Council, will explain. Okay, and
Yeah, any
each committee has actually the uh, chairs, so not to worry. Okay,
yeah, like Bronya said, any question you have towards the chairs about the committee, about the study guide, anything else that you might have that talks about the committee in specific, just wait a few minutes. We'll join the breakout rooms, then you can ask your chairs. I'm sure they will have a way to help you with your questions.
Wonderful. So
Israel,
let's take
Interpol.
questions relevant to the research part. If it's questions that are relevant for what we just did, please pick your hands up and Veer will choose you.
Yeah, Israel, Interpol, do you still have a question?
No, I'll ask the chairs because it's more specific. It's about research, but it's more specific to Interpol.
Okay,
Uh,
I see. Thank you.
I see the question in the chat, how the delegates in double delegations present an opening speech. You decide, you can share, you can decide who is presenting, who is doing what. Just it's up to you. It's your cooperation.
Yeah, I'll second Bronya on that. Look, as long I have found that when one delegate starts a speech and one continues the opening speech, it
Mhm.
can sort of deter information from what people are saying. But early on in a committee, stylistically, it can also be cute. So, like, I would say, as long as both of you are active, and you make sure the chairs are aware that it's not one. And I've seen sometimes where like one really is different from the other, but both of you, I'd say like chairs know, and I think you can definitely ask Roy, who's a very experienced chair MUNer and a bunch of other things. The chairs will know that people are active if, you know, one is speaking more and one is outside or writing more. Like that is expected. But even the one who's doing the floor work and, you know, the lobbying, they should still speak occasionally, show that they're there, you know, and both so that, like both chairs see both rather than one saying, I see this delegate all the time, and the other one, you know, saying, I haven't seen anybody. Like, what's going on? Actually, there was a funny experience I had a number of years ago chairing where there was a delegate who I thought was always inside speaking, and the other chair thought was always outside doing the floor work. And we're like, it's impossible that this person is, you know, here like something's wrong. They must be missing like half the committee session. But turns out it was identical twins who were double
Mm.
delegating, and it was good we figured that out. Okay, questions. Marvin, you have a question.
Yes. When you were speaking about committee, you talked about mandate, but you did not talk about power and responsibility, the other two sides of it.
Okay, so I did when I talked about the committee. I said that
Okay.
first of all,
I'm sorry.
mandate's the first thing. No, but I'll clarify because I
Okay.
use power and responsibility because a lot of people know Spider-Man, and I thought it would be cute. But
Okay.
as far as the power and responsibility, the power of what the committee has, it usually comes from precedent. It comes from the things that they've already done and the
Okay.
resources that they have available and what they do. Sort of, I'd say the responsibility is the mandate, and the power comes from the precedent, and also, I guess, what they're doing today as far as scope of focus and resources. So if that
Okay.
was confusing for anybody else, just like send me a private message. I can update that. I write power and responsibility because the Spider-Man quote, but its mandate is what they say they're going to do. What they're doing today is what they're currently working on, and they can more
And the
easily
president.
relocate resources. And precedent is what they have done ever. To do something which breaks precedent requires more data on your side and is harder to contest with. As opposed to
Okay.
something completely new, which other delegates can say, our committee has never done this before. We shouldn't start now. People who oppose the idea. All
Okay.
right.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Okay, we have time for one more question if there is. All right. Awesome. Everyone, it has really been a pleasure to get to hang out with you. OECD Spain. All right, final question.
Yeah. Is the 20 minutes time of research really enough to take all the important information that I need?
Okay, so first of all, I'd say 100% no,
No.
but 5 hours can also not give you the information that you need. So I'm saying my recommendation is learn about your committee for 20 minutes, get whatever you do, stop, move on to learning about your country, get the 5 things that I said: size, population, war, like neighbor relations, wealth, and politics. Do that. That you should be able to do in 5 minutes. 7 minutes, you get all that information. Stop. Say, okay, I know who I am. Then learn about the topic for with that with knowing your committee, knowing your country. Learn about topic for 20 minutes. Dig as deep as you can. I recommend using The Economist or The Atlantic, one of those in-depth magazines that do a lot of research. That should be like your entry point. After that, stop and go, okay, with what I know, where do I think I should apply my policy? Where do I think that, like, what should my clash be? And by then, you'll know enough that you'll know where to dig deeper if you need more. But the reason I say know where to stop is because the alternative is we can read endlessly and come up with nothing. I had a MUNer who came with a binder this big. She was representing Russia, and it had nothing about the topic. It had the history of Russia from like the Romanovs in the 1750s. It had about like oil coming through the country and pipes, but like nothing about the topic. And I was in shock. And I said, by the way, if you get best delegate, like I'd love to read this and see what it was. She like didn't. So knowing where to stop is just get yourself oriented, and then you'll know better where to dig further. And sometimes it will take longer. The way I describe research is there's usually like 1 minute research, which everyone can easily find, especially for an easily researchable country. 5 minute research, which other good delegates will possibly find, and then things which are more like 20-minute research that only you're going to find. For example, that a country can close down embassies when there's a famine. I would never have thought of that. So that's very specific types of research. So I would say it's better to orient yourself and then dig in the right place rather than, putting a ladder on the wrong tree and then climbing up all the way.
Another
Okay.
focus tip, I learned it from someone from the American Embassy. Go to the site of the UN of your country and check, research there. It's pretty focused, pretty easy to find out. What is your country's position in the UN on the topic, if it's any, or maybe in the within the bloc, your country, like many African countries are the African Union, okay, and we have all these blocks, okay, so it's very useful.
100%. And if your countries don't say, you may have to dig deeper. But remember, sometimes saying nothing about something is saying something about something. All right. Are there any more questions? Is everything clear? Give me a thumbs up if we're all clear. We're all good. All right. Excellent.
Now
Okay.
everyone goes to the rooms
So
with the
thank you,
chairs.
everyone. I'm signing off.
Thank
This
you,
has been
Daniel,
great.
and waiting for your second session and for our real simulations in the committees on the 11th of November, right?
All right.
Yes.
Amazing.
Okay.
Thank you,
Good.
everyone.
Thank you. And